Welcome to Castle Vadd. I'm Vadd, and today we are playing Ark Survival Evolved. If you are new here, please consider subscribing. If you have enjoyed Castle Vadd before, welcome back. Make sure you turn on notifications when you subscribe to stay current. We have a number of taming rafts we're going to learn how to build today for taming things underwater, on land, and in the air. Please feel free to use the timestamps to move around. I'm going to explain a little bit about the difference between the raft and the motorboat, and then we're going to talk about how to raise and lower foundations to successfully build on rafts. If you already are an expert on these topics, feel free to skip these sections and jump right into the builds. I'm not going to explain them twice. The raft is a wood tier structure. The motorboat is a metal tier structure. The raft has a structure limit of 88, while the motorboat can have 135 structure. The wooden raft does not require fuel to move. The motorboat requires fuel to move. The wooden raft is slower than the motorboat, and the motorboat also has a higher health pool than the raft. The lead sickness is able to destroy both the raft and the motorboat, regardless what structures you have built on to the raft or motorboat. Even if it's a tech foundation, metal foundation, it'll go right through. The lead sickness can be avoided by staying out of the deep ocean waters. Additionally, you can throw some giant bee honey off the side when you're under attack. This will temporarily distract and pacify the lead sickness. In addition, you could use some of your precious structure limits to build an auto turret or a plant species turret. In single player or in a unofficial private server, you can increase the structure limit on rafts and motorboats to allow for much more exciting builds. Everything I'm going to build in this video will be under the official structure limit cap. To raise and lower foundations, I have my original foundation right here. I snap a pillar directly into the center of this first foundation, and that creates a lower snap point for my next foundation I want to place. If I then take a pillar and snap it into the lower foundation in the direct middle, it once again will create a lower snap point for my third foundation. You crazy turtle. For my third foundation that I'd like to snap. This of course works with any foundation and pillar in the current Ark game: thatch, wood, metal, stone, tech. You can lower foundations using this technique. If you're using any of the great fantastic building mods, you're gonna have some troubles. A lot of them auto level your foundations. This is building with vanilla Ark structures. There's a faster way to do this. If I start with the pillar instead of the foundation, and then I snap my foundation one snap point over from that pillar, it's going to auto lower it several levels for me. If I then pick up this pillar and once again move it directly to the center of the foundation, and then I go for my original foundation and snap one foundation over, it's going to lower it for me again. If you need to raise a foundation while building on a raft, you've made a mistake in lowering your foundation. You're going to start the same way: foundation, pillar right in the middle. This time we're going to put a ceiling on top, snap a second ceiling next to our first ceiling. We're going to put a pillar at a slightly higher snap point. See, it pokes through the ceiling. Then we put a ceiling on top of the little pokey part, and from there this will give us a higher snap point for foundations. This works on rafts. Again, if you need to raise a foundation on a raft, you've probably made a mistake when you were lowering your foundation for your raft build. Just like when we were on the ground here on the raft, I place a pillar and it gives me a lower snap point for my foundation. I'm going to pick up my pillar, place it directly in the middle of the foundation I just lowered, and I'm going to have a lower snap point again. This brings us to rule number one of raft building, which is be patient and breathe. You are building on a moving surface that is bobbing up and down. The snap points are very glitchy. We will of course be building with stone tier structure to protect our raft. The raft is a wood structure, so by lowering a stone foundation into it, I now have a stone raft. Here you can see a little bit of the wooden raft is poking through my stone foundation. Not a big deal. It's still going to register as a stone tier structure. That stone foundation will need to be damaged before the raft can be damaged. When building on the raft, we need to be very careful of how we treat the drive seat, that foundation area around the tiller, the rudder, where we get the raft to go from. If we put a foundation over that spot on level with other foundations, you can no longer drive your raft. One workaround is to take a pillar and slightly lower the foundation by the raft than the other foundations on your raft. This way the drive seat foundation still allows you to drive. Another option is to use the hatch frames. You're going to need a couple of wall pieces to get the proper snap points available to you. You can snap a hatch frame directly under the drive seat. You can put a reinforced trap door there, which will allow you to swim up from underneath. And if you're really worried about the teeny tiny gap that nothing can currently fit through, you can also snap in 2 or 3 additional walls to the edges of the box to further secure that little gap there. This brings us to our second rule of raft building, which is to be creative. There is not one best raft. Lots of different builds work. The best way to lower foundations currently in Ark is to drop any kind of fence foundation, any kind of pillar, and then the foundation you want at a third snap point, and that's going to perfectly lower it into your raft. This will even allow you to still drive the raft without having to mess around with the hatch frame or different level foundations. Rafts in Ark Survival Evolved have been changed multiple times in multiple patches. If this technique is no longer viable in a future update, you still have the other tools in this video to put foundations for your raft builds. You now know how to raise foundations and how to lower foundations. The next tool you need to have in your raft building toolbox is how to expand the raft. So if you put a ceiling down, it'll create a snap point where you can snap in a foundation on the side to further build out your raft. These snap points can be a little tricky to find. Sometimes it's easier to snap these foundations onto the ceilings from under the raft. Again, you can do this with any type of vanilla structure in Ark. I'm using thatch because it's cheap and it looks different from the stone foundations. These ceilings you use to expand don't need to stay on your raft when you're done. When you build a raft that is 4 wide, oftentimes the tiller, the drive seat, is 2 foundations wide. So remember to make sure you have 2 foundations at the appropriate height. These building techniques works on both the raft and the motorboat. You now know how to build a 3x3 raft, a 4x4 raft, and those same structures on the motorboat. Remember the rules to raft building. 1, be patient, breathe. You're working on a structure that's bobbing up and down and moving. 2, be creative. There's no one best raft build. Lots of different builds work great. The basic underwater Taming Raft starts with a 3x3 raft design. You're going to need to go at least 4 walls down so you get a snap point for the ceiling piece. You don't need to leave that 4th wall there once you snap the ceiling. This gap here can stay. You don't need to fill in that gap with a wall, so you have 4 walls on one side and 3 in another. Giant hatch frames are so that we can get the megalodons into the trap. You can get the dolphins and the mantas through the Dino gateways. This raft is deliberately built well under the structure limit, leaving you plenty of room to decide how you want to add things to it. If you want to put a bed and some taming supplies on the top, that is totally an option. If you want to go into the raft and build a little trank room, you can also add more structures there. There is plenty of room to continue to build on this raft. Remember, with an underwater taming raft, if you drive this raft towards the shore and you still have your tame in this raft, you might kill it, glitch it out, despawn it, so we want to be careful. Another option for underwater taming is the underwater wide mouth raft. We're going to start with the 3x3 foundation. We're going to put 1 ceiling length off the back edge. We're going to go down 4 walls from that ceiling off the back. We're going to need to snap on 1 more wall to get a snap point for our ceiling. If you're really hurting on structure limits, these 4 foundations here can be switched for 1 hatch frame and 1 trap door, saving you 2 structures. After we put on the trap doors and the remaining ceiling pieces for the bottom, we're going to put on our Dino gates and Dino gateways. Remember, the Megalodon only fits through the giant trapdoor. On the wide mouth trap, we're going to leave the front of the trap slightly open. A Megalodon can fit through a 2x2 gap, so when we kite a Megalodon into the trap, we will just place 2 more wall pieces, creating a gap the Megalodon can't fit through. I recommend putting a little shooting zone from the back and a ladder piece so that you can easily get up and trank out your tame. A third option for an underwater taming raft is 8 the Ocho. Make sure to build your first walls directly below the drive foundation here. We're going 3 wide on the foundations and 4 long. We're going to be using Dino gates for our floors. This pen works great for mantas. It works great for the dolphins. It works great for the sharks. You have plenty of room to get done what you need to get done as far as taming underwater. This raft, like the previous 2, is deliberately built well under the structure limit, giving you plenty of structures remaining. You can leave this gap here. You don't have to put a 4th foundation there. Nothing fits through that. This is a great raft to get you onto the water of Ark unafraid. You can also add a couple of single door frames and a ladder so that you have a little bit of a safe zone if you're working with a Megalodon. And if you don't want to even get in the water with this raft, you can walk along the edge and trank it out from up here. Another great option for raft taming is to build the front load classic. You start with a 3 wide by 5 long base. I'm building this out of metal on a wooden raft. When we're putting down the Dino gates, we're trying to avoid this gap here. By building with metal, I can trap anything up to a giga in here if I really want to. The back wall of this raft will be 4 walls high, which will then be 1 wall higher than the ramp leading in. If you're really hurting for space, you might only need to put that middle wall, since the gates help narrow the outside wall gap. When you are hurting for space again, you can always put only 1 or 2 doors on this raft, since the wall pieces will take 1 less space. This raft is deliberately built well under the structure limit to give you plenty of room to be creative. Remember the rules to raft building. Rule number 1 is to be patient. You're building on a moving structure that is bobbing up and down. This is an additional challenge. The snap points can be very frustrating since you have multiple great foundations placed. And remember, the second rule is to be creative. There's no one best raft to build. This is one option to help you use your raft as a mobile base if you want, and a mobile taming pen with endless possibilities. If you don't want to build on a raft, you can always use a motorboat, but again, remember, it needs fuel. This is the front load classic. If you're having trouble getting things up the massive ramp, you could add another set of ceilings or stairs on the front edge, so as you drive up to the banks of the river or the beach, you can more easily get things in. If you want to add side ramps for your doors, I recommend putting them down before you put the doors in. It's going to add more structures, but it's going to make it easier to get those structures flush. Variation on the front load classic is the front load stretched classic. I add another foundation in the back, so it's 3 wide and 6 long. I don't bring the walls 4 high. If you're really worried about things jumping over a 3 foundation length gap, you can bring the walls up 1 more high. You can save on space here in a lot of different ways. You could have less windows and doors. You don't have to go all the way up to the ramp's roof. Again, well under the structure limit, so that you have plenty of room to be creative and add to your raft what you want. The mini V Raft is a great option when you only want to use the base for taming. With the mini V Raft, we're going to start with a 3x5 foundation. We are going to use stairs instead of the sloped roofs or ramps. This allows us to see through the ramp when we are driving in first person or in third person. Sometimes you need to put some walls down to place the stairs down. If you're having an issue getting creatures onto this ramp, you can always add an additional stair piece going further off the edge. the back part of this ramp. If you are again struggling on structures, you don't have to make it as tall as it is in the video here. I only put down one door into the drive room and one door into the taming pit. You're going to trank from on top of the pit in this one. This is a great raft for just taming whatever you want, not so much for a base build, but I left plenty of structures for you to be creative. The Barato Raft works great for any creature from an Allosaurus down. Again, I am deliberately building well under the structure limit. This raft will not cost nearly as much in resources. Allosauruses cannot break stone tier structures, so you're welcome to build with stone. This raft is only for taming. If you want to add more to it, you've got 50 extra spaces, or 102 extra spaces, depending if you're on the raft or the motorboat. Remember, most creatures in Ark, when they aggro onto you, it's by line of sight, so you're going to be visible if you're on this raft. I recommend a third staircase on the front of the raft. When I'm building a base on a raft, I prefer to go with a barn base where the taming pit's in the back and the base is in the front. Here you can see we need 19 foundations. You start with a 3x3 on the raft, and then you're going to expand out the back side of the raft in 2x5. This raft can be built with the current initial structure limit of 88 on a wooden raft. When I'm building a base on a raft that I'm going to use for taming and for exploring, I prefer to use a motorboat if I can. That gives me, for current Ark settings, a total structure limit of 135. This raft provides plenty of room. You can switch for those walls in the front of the base for a dino gate if you really wanted to get tames in here. You could also lose a wall and stack up another double door, which will allow you to ride some early game mounts through, such as a raptor. You could replace 4 roof tiles with a giant hatch frame as well. If you are really struggling to get things into this taming raft, you can always add a third level on the edge here. This raft style I call goofy style. I'm deliberately going to build something that looks a little silly but works perfectly fine. I'm also not going to finish this build. It's going to be very open form. I'm trying to show you with rule number 2 we can be creative with how we want to build our rafts. Here I start with almost a 3x3 raft structure. Instead of expanding with foundations, I'm only going to use ceilings. I'm building with things that are all stone tier and above so far. Now I'm using these dino gates, and I'm being very conservative on my structures on the raft. These dino gates are going to cost a total of 8 structures, but maybe I don't like the gates. Maybe they don't work as well. Okay, I can build this wall, and by putting a wall up instead, I can then put a hatch frame on top, which then means I can use this trap for flyers. This is a perfectly serviceable raft. The build is done. This is all you need to be taming an Ark on a raft. And maybe I want more. Maybe I want to build a base. I have this whole other side. I could build a little base in here without issue. I've got this silly staircase that is perfectly serviceable. I can get around the raft without issue and tame what I want. This is a goofy style raft. I can of course build this on a motorboat, and I can build with tech if I want. Here's another goofy style raft where I have the main kind of base part of the raft over on one side, and I have the taming section completely separated from kind of my living, planning, taming section. This raft is a wood raft that I built tech on. You can build this however you want, and this one's kind of clean. It's a little square with the stairs up the front. I can get things into the trap through the square. I can leave a gate open to have my tames come in through the gate. I could put a lid on it. I'm well under the structure limit, which would allow me to tame flyers. And just because it's a goofy style raft doesn't mean it can't be a real clean build. Remember the 2 rules to raft building: be patient, breathe. You're working on a moving structure, and be creative. Here I can get things in through the dino gate. I can get my potential tames in through the ramp. Over here on the roof, I am perfectly safe from whatever I want to tame. I can tame T-Rexes down in this trap. I could block off this edge and thus be able to tame an Argentavis or a Griffin in this goofy style raft. And there's plenty of room in here to make a reasonably sized base. I have all the things I need in here to adventure in Ark. This is a goofy style raft, but it follows all the rules of raft build. Here I have a front load base raft. I'm going to start with a 3x15 foundation frame. I'm going to sink walls 1 foundation in. That's going to help with my ramp. I'm going to build a very simple open-ended design, deliberately well under the structure limit, and we're going to see what else we can do with this. Here you can see I have a completed base, I have a completed ramp. I just need to put on the doors. This is perfectly serviceable. You can tame with this, you can use this as your base, you can adventure in this front load base raft. But maybe that's not good enough. Maybe you had issues with some things running off the slides. You put up a couple of rails. Maybe you wanted more than a couple of railings. Now I've made the back end base too high, which gives me lots of great options for tranking things out. Maybe that's not enough either. I want to get my dinos I tame into my base, so now I switched it so there's a dino gate on the back. Well, then I've got flyers and I want a roof and I want the house buff. You've got options. It's your base, build it your way. For a little bit of frosting in this video, so you're trying to build on the raft and the sail is getting in your way, you go to options and that'll bring up the hide sail option, make it easier to build and to navigate. The wooden raft only moves forward, the metal motorboat moves forward and backwards. When you have a plant crop for a plant species turn on the raft, it does not need to get irrigated. If you're running low on space, you can knock out some foundations and put down a giant hatch frame. If you're building on the raft and it keeps getting destroyed, move into deeper waters.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Feel free to comment with suggestions for future content you'd like to see. If you would like to see more quality content, please consider supporting the channel through Patreon and/or utilizing the affiliated links. Thank you.